С профессором Цандером, с профессором Рольфом Нетом. Мы проводим сейчас симпозиум, который называется Saint-Petersburg Joint Meeting, то есть объединенный симпозиум. И этот симпозиум является частью очень известных симпозиумов в мире, которые называются...
Our conference is a part of the bigger one, which first was held about 20 years ago in Hamburg, and since that, it is held every 2 years.
In memory of prominent Russian hematologist Boris Vladimirovich Afanasyev, we talked with his colleague and friend, Professor Zubarovskaya Ludmila Stepanovna. She is a professor of Department of Hematology, Transfusiology, Transplantation of Faculty of Postgraduate Education in Pavlov University, and Deputy Director of Hematopoietic Stem Cell Transplantation of Raisa Gorbacheva Research Institute.
Ludmila Stepanovna, tell us how you met with Boris Vladimirovich. We met with Boris Vladimirovich a long time ago. I was a student of the St. Petersburg State Medical University. It was 1977. Boris Vladimirovich was at that time the head of one of the first hematology departments. Also, at the time, he was already engaged in scientific work. He created a cultivation lab. He taught hematology to students. These were very interesting classes. I was impressed by everything he told us. His authority. That's how we met, and I came to his lab to perform scientific work on hematology. At the time, Boris Vladimirovich was studying granular monocytopoiesis. It was the first time when new methods of cultivation were created and mastered. They were used to diagnose acute leukemia, myelodysplastic syndrome, bone marrow failure, different pathogenesis. That's how we met, and our professional activity have been carried out together for many years. Ludmila Stepanovna, how did your work develop? What kind of person was Boris Vladimirovich in his work? Boris Vladimirovich was a very enthusiastic person. In his work, he devoted himself to his work and, of course, demanded a similar return from us. Boris Vladimirovich was a man who was focused on setting a super task, despite all the existing difficulties. Even any problems could not be discussed without solving them. Everything he planned, he tried to accomplish and achieve, despite all those difficult working conditions. And despite the changes in the country that took place at that time, when there was no funding for scientific research, funding for high-tech treatment methods. Nevertheless, Boris Vladimirovich was always focused on achieving the goals. And of course, his personality, authority, and life position always attracted people, helped to create a team of like-minded people who later solved the range of tasks together. Please tell us how the history of the creation of the first children's transplant center in Russia began. Of course, the center was not created simultaneously. The establishment of our institute was the culmination of all those programs that have been implemented consistently for many years, even decades. Of course, initially, Boris Vladimirovich was a classical hematologist. He is associated with the achievements in the introduction of chemotherapy regimens for acute leukemia. He is also associated with the study of the blast crisis of chronic myeloid leukemia. He also did the first publication that confirmed the existence of myelodysplastic syndrome in children. And of course, there were the first use of cyclophosphamide in patients with aplastic anemia without subsequent bone marrow transplantation. That is, Boris Vladimirovich was a classical hematologist who was engaged in scientific research in the field of granular monocytopoiesis. Subsequently, the situation developed so that in our country there was an urgent need for the method of bone marrow transplantation to become available to patients in Russia. And of course, the impetus for the implementation of this program was very tragic events. It is the accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant when it became clear that this method should be in Russia. And the need for this method is high. At the time, the first result on the effectiveness of bone marrow transplantation in the treatment of malignant diseases of the blood system in Europe and the United States had already appeared. All this led to the fact that Boris Vladimirovich Afanasyev, together with Valery Grigorievich Savchenko, a representative of Moscow hematologists, were sent for an internship in the United States to Seattle, to the clinic of the Nobel laureate Donald Thomas. They've been interning long enough, and after returning to St. Petersburg, the first department of bone marrow transplantation was established. It should be noted that there were attempts to perform adult transplantation in Russia in the 70s, but there was no permanent program yet. And though the efforts of Boris Vladimirovich, this program was created. And in December this year marks the 30th anniversary of the first allogeneic bone marrow transplant in a child in the Russian Federation. It was from this moment, from the moment of successful transplants, that this method began to develop. At first, these were related bone marrow transplants, but later it became clear that it was necessary to develop an unrelated transplant program. In 2000, a clinic was organized at the university where these programs began to develop, and then haploidentical bone marrow transplantation began to develop. Subsequently, it became clear that there were a lot of patients, and the clinic could not fully meet this need for bone marrow transplantation. And then the Raisa Gorbacheva Memorial Research Institute for Pediatric Oncology, Hematology, and Transplantology was built. It was built with the support of Gorbacheva Foundation. This institute was opened in 2007. This has significantly expanded our capabilities. And now this institute performs up to 400 transplants a year in both children and adults. And various types of transplants are carried out. Of course, all this took place under the leadership of Boris Vladimirovich Afanasyev. All the ideas that he planned, he implemented in our work. And the fact that we now have ample opportunities, a large team of trained employees in many areas, is certainly his merit. Tell us about the cooperation and friendship of Boris Vladimirovich with foreign colleagues. This cooperation has a long history. For the first time, Boris Vladimirovich met with hematologists in Europe. Also in the United States when he was on an internship. An important role was played by cooperation with University of Hamburg, with Professor Axel Zander, who for many years helped St. Petersburg in the development of the method of bone marrow transplantation, providing assistance in many directions. First of all, he was training the staff of transplantation clinic. More than 60 people have been trained over a 20-year period at the University of Hamburg. Professor Axel Tandrut repeatedly visited the clinic, checked on the patients, participated in symposiums, scientific discussions. Also, in a very difficult period for our country, he provided the necessary humanitarian assistance. For example, the supply of equipment, medicines. Boris Vladimirovich noted the help of Professor Gerard Wagemacher, from Erasmus University, Rotterdam. Professor Wagemacher also visited the clinic several times and supported our scientific research. Boris Vladimirovich highly appreciated his friendship with Professor Hans Kolb, Professor Thomas Buchner, Professor Dieter Holzer, and Professor Andrea Bocegalupa. For many years, he had the most friendly relationship with Professor Robert Gale. Of course, international cooperation has always been extremely important for us. It is difficult to overestimate the role of this cooperation in the development of bone marrow transplantation in St. Petersburg and in Russia. We will always, with gratitude, remember all the hematologists of Europe, the United States, who helped us in difficult times. Which of the achievements of Boris Vladimirovich do you consider the most significant? One of the important achievements of Boris Vladimirovich is the performance of the first allogeneic bone marrow transplant in a child in the Russian Federation. Boris Vladimirovich was among the first in many directions. For example, he was the first to use cyclophosphamide in a non-transplantable aplastic anemia patient in 1980. Also, he has done the first publication to confirm the existence of myelodysplastic syndrome in children. In 1985, he wrote one of the first monographs devoted to human initial stem cells. He was the first who opened of a university clinic for bone marrow transplantation in Russia. Boris Vladimirovich made the discovery and widespread implementation of the unrelated bone marrow transplant program in Russia. This is a great work carried out by Boris Vladimirovich to create a register of unrelated donors in the Russian Federation. He launched a broad program for haploidentical transplantation in children and adults. This is the first international journal on cell therapy and transplantation in Russia. Boris Vladimirovich successfully made allogeneic transplantation in an immunocompromised patient, as well as one of the first transplants to a child after pre-implantation diagnosis with Schwachman-Diamond syndrome. Of course, this is not a complete list of his achievements, but one of the main achievements of Boris Vladimirovich is still worth noting: the creation of a team of like-minded people who are ready to continue all this research, all the work that Boris Vladimirovich planned. He noted himself that this is his main achievement. Ludmila Stepanovna, who was Boris Vladimirovich Afanasyev for you? Since we have worked together for many years, of course, I could say a lot of words that would characterize our professional path, but I want to say differently. Boris Vladimirovich was a great friend to me in the highest sense of this word.
Мы нуждались в лекарствах, в оборудовании. И я думаю, что трудно переоценить.
I appreciate very much all that help that was given by our German colleagues, especially by Professor Axel Zander, Director of Bone Marrow Transplant Center from our Twin City Hamburg, and Professor Kurt Wenzel, Director of Children's Hematologic Center.
Руководитель отделения детской гематологии Гамбургского университета. Я думаю, что они сыграли решающую роль в создании.
They played an important role in organizing of our center, and this conference too, dedicated to the opening of our center.
Созданием этого центра. Если бы не было этого центра, я думаю, нам бы не удалось организовать этот симпозиум. И, конечно, нам бы не приехали ведущие